Looks like we got Shanghai'd into exploring Shadowhearts today. Let's go kick an old man's ass, shall we? But before we begin, I'd love to give a shout out to Katophoenix for her great artwork. Be sure to check her work out in the description below. And I'd like to ask you to support the content as well. Let me know your thoughts on the game or the video. Now let's dive into China and start this review. Like a typical JRPG, you play as a large cast of characters, but our primary protagonists are Yuri and Alice, two young adults who have terrific power and a drive to stop the evil plans of Duhai and Roger Bacon. You also have a large supporting cast of characters like the spy Marguerite, the Taoist master Zhu Jin, and more. The game itself is a horror-inspired JRPG with a few other mechanics that help to differentiate itself from other RPGs of the time. I personally love this inspiration. I mean, it's why it's held my interest so much more than, say, Final Fantasy. I love the horror-inspired environments, the enemies, and the spooky story. The story itself is also interesting, with a few different plot threads going on, such as Roger Bacon's machinations, the malice of the monster souls that Yuri is sent to the grave haunting him, which lead to manifestations of the Phantom Foxface, Duhai's plan to activate an ancient spell that could grant him unlimited power. There's a lot going on here, and you'll be here for quite a while. The game is also set within the 1910s after the Russian Revolution and after Russia got its ass kicked by Japan, and during some of Japan's invasion into mainland China. This also means you get to beat up on Imperial Japanese soldiers. The game, befitting its nature, covers a lot of dark topics, from patricide to child abduction, to literally summoning all of hell to destroy the fucking earth. Hell, the first major town you find is infested by cannibalistic monsters. The game definitely hits some dark topics. The game is also a sequel to an older RPG called Kodelka, and makes this the second in the series, though going forward these games will carry the Shadowhearts title. Settle in for the long haul. This is a JRPG, and typical of JRPGs, you're gonna put a lot of hours into this game. I hit the halfway point after around 20 hours of gameplay. That's only spending like 1 hour of it grinding intentionally. And that grinding was just me more curious as to how many times they let me keep fighting the same guy over and over again. Turns out the answer is unlimited. Oh well, they let me afford a nice upgrade for my equipment as well as plenty of experience. Speaking of which, the game features a somewhat different upgrade system than what's typical in JRPGs. Instead of, say, allocating skill points or reinforcing materials into your weaponry, the game automatically allocates points for each character, based on their individual fighting styles. Now, weaponry can be upgraded by choosing to allocate cash towards hit area, weapon damage, or both. These both come with positives and negatives. Hit area is much cheaper and expands your accuracy on the combat ring, while upgrading power is more expensive and makes your hit area smaller. It lets you pump up your damage much higher. Now this game also takes another deviation from the traditional combat of JRPGs by adding an active combat ring. This ring you hit when the spinning dials within the target areas. These determine how many times you hit in an attack combo, as well as how much damage you deal with these hits if you hit the red critical areas. The ring system's also used in many aspects of the game, such as with the guild cards, which you can use to get discounts and sell your stuff for hire with shops. This is an interesting little deviation that seeks to engage you more than the traditional JRPG formula of wait your turn to hit them in the face. Now it adds some level of skill, timing, and item usage to it. Another wrinkle to the formula within Shadowhearts is the addition of a sanity system. This sanity system is basically a gauge to the character's reaction of the madness around them. If their sanity bottoms out, they'll go berserk and wildly attack whatever they can, be that friend or foe. Either toss them a sanity restoring snack or finish the fight as fast as you can, however you can. Now, Shadowhearts has yet another unique system on top of it. Yuri is a harmonizer. What this means is he can fuse with the spirits of monsters he has defeated and use their strengths and abilities to enhance his combat style. My next point applies to the fusions as well as all the monsters. Each creature has an elemental type, and opposites deal extra damage to each other. Fire smashes water and vice versa, light beats on dark and vice versa, and so on. Fairly standard stuff there, but another deviation is the fact that each creature of that type that you kill, the higher the counter goes in an elemental counter. Fill that counter up and you unlock a new fusion option for Yuri, and each type has 3 tiers, as well as a few secret unlockable fusions that are non-elemental. Speaking of creatures, this game has some of my favorite visual designs for monsters in an RPG. I mean, I love all the spooky horror-themed monsters. Everything looks hideous and deformed and just out of a nightmare. Even texture swaps of earlier enemies have additional visual enhancements that help them to stand out from their earlier counterparts, as well as additional moves. And given how many different areas there are, there's just an insane amount of monsters. The boss designs are also fantastic. They are varied and just as spooky as the smaller enemies. Now the game does contain its fair share of jank, which is inherent to this genre of games. The ring system definitely takes some time to get used to. When I first played the game, I had zero clue what the hell I was doing. You might also go into an encounter with the wrong fusion selected or the wrong items selected and just get your ass handed to you by a boss, or at the very least take a lot longer to defeat them. This also applies to status effect dealing bosses. Like 2 of the bosses leading into the second half have instant knockout or even death moves. If you don't have the right equipment on beforehand, this can lead to an irritating death, and potential for backtracking a good while since your last save. I mean, one of them literally has a move called Game of Death, and if you're not Yuri, either in his human or Death Emperor form, will be instantly knocked out without the equip item that negated. He can also absorb all magic attacks and use them to heal, so this boss can only be beaten with physical damage. So if you have no clue about these things and you just go in, you're likely to die on your first attempts with no clue as what the hell happened. Overall though, the gameplay is still excellent and an improvement on the genre in my opinion. I just found it more engaging than Final Fantasy, but that may also be the fact I enjoy the horror theming much more than typical fantasy. Oh, the game runs beautifully. It's a very stylized game, and I love the early CG cutscenes. There's something about 90s and early 2000s CG cutscenes that really click differently with me. It's also visually pretty damn nice for a 2001 title. I love the environmental designs, especially the first village you come across. Once the facade of civilization drops and the town's revealed for the monsters they really are, an eerie red fog descends on the town and it's covered in decay and corruption and corpses. The game starts throwing more horror-based monstrosities like zombies and hellcats. And your first boss, a god of the fucking underworld. The game is filled with this aesthetic and styling throughout, and I for one cannot get enough of it. There's not enough games I will just sit down and play for 8 hours straight, just slipping further into the world and the soundtrack. Speaking of, the soundtrack for this game is also fantastic, and it really helps set it apart from others within its genre. Especially when, say, a party member's sanity snaps, and the music shifts into a panic-inducing, pounding drone song. Kinda like what you'd hear in Silent Hill 1, which I do really like. The game also runs just fine. I didn't notice any issues with the game itself performance-wise. Except, well, if I tried to do the lotto, the game would just freeze. I think that's because the disc is slightly scratched rather than the game bugging the hell out. Overall, it's a pretty good time. I'd say go out and buy this game right now, but let's be honest, this game goes for $50 loose and $100 complete. this game will cost you some cash. So don't go out and buy it unless you really want it for your collection. But I do recommend you experience it, even if you have to do it via other means. It's truly a fantastic game and I loved every minute of it. It's definitely a unique game in the genre that sadly went less noticed than it really should have, which is why it's so expensive nowadays. Much like Ninja 5-0, a stellar game that didn't sell well back in the day, but high praise led to a high demand and low amounts of copies out there, which I also do hold that game too. If you get your hands on it though, I recommend you give it a whirl. Enjoy it. I think this just about concludes my thoughts on the review. Be sure to check the description and give Kato some love for her stellar artwork, as well as my social media and supporting us down below. This has been Core, and I'll see you next time.